End the Big Four banks' reign of terror, and cancel AUKUS now. Coming up on this week's Citizens Report. Welcome to the Citizens Report for the 15th of May 2025. I'm Elisa Barwick. Joining me today is Citizens Party researcher and writer Richard Bardon. Welcome, Richard.
Thanks, Elisa.
And on this week's show, we're going to talk about the real reason you can't afford to buy a home. It's very much to do with the banks. And then we're going to discuss our push to end the AUKUS arrangement, which should never have been made in the first place, but now we'll talk about the changed political situation, allowing it hopefully to be cancelled, and what you can do to help that campaign. Now also to help us get the message out, please do hit the like button, make a comment below, of course subscribe if you're not already a subscriber, and ring the notification bell. We'll let you know when new content comes out. And please circulate as far and as wide as you can to build the subscribers. In the wake of the election, of course, we are wanting to capitalise on all the excellent work that went out on the ground, and a big congratulations, of course, to all of you out there who were a part of that effort, and we now have to turn that into organisation. We'll be having a big membership drive. We've got a whole bunch of other plans which we'll put out there in the weeks to come. Of course, we still don't know the results of the Senate vote count. That's still ongoing. Hopefully by next week's show, I would think we should have a better idea at least of some of the notable races that we're waiting for results of, things like whether Senator Gerard Rennick got re-elected, which we've got our fingers crossed for, and our own campaigns. And there's one race actually where it's even going to take longer than the Senate vote counts, and that's the seat to our north here. We've talked a lot about of Calwell, where they are estimating a 5-week vote count. Two independents got quite a high vote. And so therefore, with the way the preferences worked, including with our candidate, it's become an almost Byzantine kind of situation where it's very convoluted and complicated to work out the preference flows.
Yeah, and you're even seeing these back and forths on some of the, what used to be safe Liberal or Labor seats that are, it's gone to the Liberal. No, wait, it's the Independent. No, wait, it's the, so too close to call, 0.5%. But there's one of them down in margins of, I think it was about 90 odd votes or something.
Wow.
The last I saw, so who knows?
Yeah, no. So we'll do a full analysis of all of that once we've got the full picture, of course, because I'm sure many of our viewers are very keen to hear. But in the meantime, let's hit some of our favourite topics, hitting the banks in particular. So first topic for the day, end the Big Four banks' reign of terror. So with the election over, we will immediately resume doing what we do best, which is absolutely lighting fires under every member of parliament, under the government, on every big issue, our core issues, which particularly relates to people's livelihood in this country, which of course is in a disastrous state of affairs, given that the economy of this nation is a disaster. You were talking about more things relevant to that this morning in terms of Australia no longer being able to produce or manufacture anything, not even what we... I'm trying to remember what you said.
Phosphate processing for fertiliser, right? They're selling, there's a fire sale of... these assets that were worth $10 billion less than 10 years ago, and now they're selling them off for a couple $100 million to get rid of them because of gas prices, because the government set up this export cartel with no price controls or domestic reservation for the whole East Coast. It's bleeding the place white. And so we don't make glass, architectural glass, that shut down. We can't even make fertiliser, don't make plastic anymore. So we're just selling raw materials and buying finished products made out of those materials.
Yeah, And it really shows up the situation with the banks, because it seems that, I mean, the banks in this country make record profits on a global scale. It seems like they're the only agencies that can really make big profits and survive and get ahead, where everything else that is of real value is collapsing.
Yeah, well, and that's the thing. They'll throw all these numbers at you and this and that about, justify these profits. But at the end of the day, you just got to look at it in simple terms. If you don't make any, everybody's complaining about productivity, right? No productivity growth for X number of years, no real wage growth for X number of years. Well, if you've got an unproductive economy and you've got no wage growth, real wage growth, which is adjusted for inflation and expenses and essential spending and essential costs of living and so forth, well, where do you think that's going? Where do you think these banks' record profits year after year after year are coming from? Right? It's not quite a zero-sum game, but it's pretty close. It's like a seesaw.
Yeah.
The reason you're down is because they're up.
They're up, exactly. And we're demanding that bank profit machine be cancelled. And just to go through the latest, because the banks announced their profits last week, the Commonwealth Bank announced an after-tax annual profit of $9.5 billion. Their shares hit an all-time high, and comprise, by the way, 11.5% of the ASX 200.
Yeah, and actually I saw this morning they've just posted another $2.6 billion quarterly profit reported yesterday. So.
So these are soaring profits. The CBA is at the highest level, and note that one of the reasons is that it holds a quarter of Australian mortgages, and we're going to drill down onto that, why that's a big factor in a moment. Westpac's profit, again, after-tax profits, these are 7 billion, NAB almost 7 billion, and ANZ 6.5 billion, so they're all up there. Now, I wanted to reference in regard to the mortgage situation and how the banks are making their profits out of you and your mortgage. And, anyone that's got a mortgage knows, because of the way it's set up, you're going to end up paying, nearly the same amount again on interest as what you're paying for your mortgage, where a lot of other countries have fixed rate mortgages over long terms. So, we've got a situation here where the banks are playing the game and they're playing it to their advantage. And this was referenced by this fellow by the name of Kevin Dudney from the High Yield Property Group, who made he talked about this in a podcast that went viral. And he was referring to figures in a report from the Australia Institute that was published last October on how the big bank profits come from mortgages. And he noted that the RBA, the Reserve Bank, justifies this because, we need to have a robust banking system.
Yeah. Well, they say, the profitability indicates that it is a robust system.
Yeah.
Right? That's what the RBA claimed.
And that's what we want after all. That's good for everybody apparently. But as Dudney said, he said, I'm calling BS on that because my attitude is that, for the first time in history, affordable housing is becoming a serious issue for any government, and you've got to look at who's making the money out of that between either the government themselves or the banking system. And he hit the variable interest rate, as I mentioned. He said, you have a banking system that can adjust the interest rates at any time of their choosing, whereas on the world stage, that's not an option. So I think we all need to play by the same bloody rules. And I mean, we've shown, other experts have shown figures in the past for every $0.25% interest rate rise, the banks make an extra, I forget the figure, but a couple of $100 billion or something like that. It's like turning on the tap a bit more, to get a bit more of that profit flowing. But Dudney went on to say, I'm just saying after 45 years of future housing stuff that we do, sure, the developers have got a part to play in affordability, a whole bunch of people have, but shit, the banking system has nearly busted our first-time buyers in the last 4 years. Since the year 2000, the banks have had more robust support than anyone else on the planet because the Americans are the biggest shareholders in those banks. And he went on to identify BlackRock and Vanguard, as we have many times before, as major shareholders.
Yeah. And these are opaque money managing funds, so they they run money on behalf of God knows who, and they're they buy these shares and they vote at they have all these votes in the on the running of the banks and the selection of the board and all of the internal policy decisions. And all four, as we've mentioned before, all four of our big four banks aren't ours. They're majority foreign owned, about 80% foreign owned, and about 60% is American, and it's led by these guys. These basically hedge funds, not quite, but more or less.
Yeah, and he said, look, Australians are asleep at the wheel. The banks are the issue. And of course, this is what we've been saying, and in a moment we'll come to the solutions, because of course the solutions is something that these commentators don't usually have much to say about. And I wanted to mention, in reaction to that, the response came from senior economist at the Australia Institute, Matt Grudnoff, and he spoke to news.com.au in the article we can put up on the screen. He pointed out that Australian banks make the biggest profits in the world. He said, in fact, we're among our big four are four of the 8 most profitable banks in the world. So this is extraordinary, and he pointed to the fact that it doesn't make sense that that's the case given our population of 27 million, when a lot of the countries that we're competing with in that ranking are much, much bigger countries. And he pointed to the mortgage factor in a dramatic way. He said 17.6 billion of the 44.6 billion the Big Four made in pre-tax profits was from loans to owner-occupiers of a household with an average mortgage of $574,200, that household would contribute $200,800 over 30 years, purely to the bank's profit, which is 35% of the loan they've taken out.
Yep.
So that's what, if you're a home owner with a mortgage, you're handing 200 grand to a massive, multinational, in some cases, bank that really don't need it. 200 grand that you could desperately use, for the sake of them administering your loan. How much would they spend on the basic cost of administering a loan, really? These
days they probably run most of it through a computer.
Well, exactly, as we saw with liar loans and all kinds of things.
And bearing in mind, that's the average mortgage. Anyone who's taken out a mortgage, which the other guy, Dudney, mentioned there, anyone who's taken out a mortgage in the last 4 years, well, the average house price now, according to the CoreLogic, which is it's a private company, but it's the authoritative mortgage and property data analytics company who the Reserve Bank relies on for its figures, because it doesn't keep them, because that's how this country works.
Or doesn't.
Or doesn't, exactly. But they're saying the average house, Australia-wide now, not just capital cities, the average house is $1 million now, right? And so anyone who just took out a mortgage is whatever their deposit, the average mortgage now is $1 million less whatever deposit you can afford. So double that figure, basically.
And we've talked a lot in past shows about how that house price has been driven up by a combination of government policy, bad regulation, and the banks exploiting it all. Now, in this case, Matt Grudnoff pointed to one of the big causes, which is one of our favourite topics in this banking space, of this problem, he said, is a distinct lack of competition. We're going to come back to that shortly. Because Australia's banking system, he said, is dominated by the Big Four, they are just able to gouge their customers for more money. Very, very true. Now, I just wanted to add that in the news.com.au article, they cited ex-CBA employee and whistleblower on the banks, Jeff Morris, who said, as many people have likewise said, nothing has changed since the Royal Commission, which was meant to address these things. In fact, he said, I think they're treating people with more blatant disrespect than ever. And that's certainly true, as we've pointed out with the bank branch closures, just in complete disregard for the needs of average people, particularly in rural and regional areas. He said, "It's very clear to me that there's a vast gap between the rhetoric put out for public consumption and the way they actually treat their customers on the ground." Yes, and that is a fundamental dishonesty and lack of integrity here. And that, I think, means that they will always revert to this habit of ripping people off. And look, that is exactly why we're going to be having our New South Wales Senate candidate, who's put his name up for the 2028 election already, Andy Schmulo, associate professor from Wollongong University, who has already been, as we've shown on this show, to one of the bank AGMs, and he will be at all of them as they come up to hold their feet to the fire on this issue. So that's a big part of our campaign to come. But I did also want to note in response to this story that the Australian Banking Association did not surprise, it stuck to its form, saying in response to these issues with bank profits that 49% of banks are owned directly by households or through their super, so it's in everyone's interest that they remain profitable and competitive.
Well,
I feel better now.
Well, I don't know where they get that number from, but it's garbage anyway, no matter what the number is. You're not guaranteed anything out of your super.
No, there's a lot of
It's a
super
scam.
in there for sure, but yeah, what's it going to mean?
It's always been a scam.
It's
We've
all
been saying that for
invested.
30 years, right? It's set up to sponsor, and Keating admitted this to his biographer, David Love. It's called Unfinished Business. Anybody can get a copy of that book. That it was never about supporting retirement, supporting workers in retirement. It was about creating and supporting a financial services industry to replace the productive jobs, the manufacturing industry that they deliberately destroyed. The Labor, quote unquote, party did that on purpose. They did this to you just as much as or more as the Liberals did, right? And if there's anything left from their investment strategy, this and their stock market and bonds and derivatives gambling, basically, depending what category of investment you select, and then they'll do whatever they can get away with within that definition. And if there's anything left at the end, then it supports your retirement. But if the stock market crashes, too bad. You lose. They've got their bonuses. They've got their commissions. You've got the bag, and guess what's in it? It ain't money.
And that's the same with the housing future funds and things like that. It's all based on if there's a profit at the end, we'll invest it. But
instead of spending,
there's not,
instead of spending $10 billion on actually building housing, like public banks used to do, housing authorities, no, they're going to put it in a fund to gamble on the stock market. This is what the Greens were calling them out on, to their credit, saying like, this is garbage. Just spend the money.
Now, the real solution is to create a public bank. And this is what we have to get all these voices demanding so that the chorus becomes so powerful that the government can't ignore it. And, we revealed after the election that we'd had discussions with people at the highest levels in both parties who, in principle, are in favour of the idea of a postal bank. As long as it doesn't get them into trouble with the banks, that's when they start to, hedge their bets a little bit, particularly before an election where they're depending on all the money coming in for their election campaigns.
Well, I'm sure that's just a coincidence.
And, of course, with the reshuffles, we've now got two ex-bankers leading the National Party. For instance, David Littleproud, Kevin Hogan. We have to get the lay of the land because we're going to push this hard, and we put out a media release a couple of days ago calling on all of our activists and supporters out there to call or email the Office of the new Communications Minister, Anika Wells, demanding that she act to save post offices, which are in danger, and in many cases across the country, they are now the only interface that Australian citizens have to do banking because of the bank closures that have happened en masse, apart from the other very, very important roles that post offices fulfil, most of which are just mum and dad operations and which have been in dire straits, apart from the few-year period when they had Christine Holgate, who of course was dumped in part because she was pushing for postal banking, because there's a lot of post offices have found across the world with the decline of letter service, one of the big things that has saved the post office in many countries is beginning to operate a postal bank through the post office. And apart from that role in potentially saving the post office, we need a public bank. I mean, to have it operate through the post office just makes common sense because they have such a big footprint. But to have a public bank that can direct credit into loans that you could just literally charge people the interest that it would cost to administer the loan, very low rates of fixed interest over long terms, that is the only way we're going to get on the pathway to restoring a situation where young people can grow up and buy a home as soon as they get their first job, essentially.
Yeah, and as we've said before, this is one of those things, it's like if the banks were telling the truth about how, they can't afford to, or their customers don't want this or that service, right? Well, we have to close these branches because they make up these justifications and pretend they're not profitable, but then admit that they always are and they close them anyway. Well, but if they were telling the truth about any of this, well, they wouldn't care, would they?
Yeah.
Because we're being led by our customers. Okay, so you serve your customers and we'll set up a public bank to provide the services that you don't want to. Because you say your customers don't want them.
Yeah.
But then they jack up about it as soon as you propose, oh, no, you couldn't do that. Oh, that'd, whatever market distortions and nonsense they come up with. So, yeah, again, it doesn't balance.
And Westpac it was, wasn't it, that just reopened?
Oh, they've just made a big show of, well, we've heard, we've heard your concerns. We're reopening this branch and that, one in Victoria, I forget the towns, one in Tasmania, one in Victoria, one in New South Wales. But they're not, because they're not branches. The legal definition of a bank branch is that it accepts and issues all, cash, including coins. And these are cashless branches. Well, there's no such thing.
Yeah.
It's like saying dry water.
Yeah.
Right? So
they make a show of, oh, this is a vibrant community. Why don't we should have a branch here?
Yeah, but all they're interested in is still making the people go through the post office for any actual banking services and not paying adequately for it.
Yeah.
And all they're really interested in, they'll put an ATM there, but all they're really interested in is corporate agribusiness that's taken over all the farms that their bastardry has driven out of business, all the family farms. That's what they're doing.
Yeah. Now, let's move on to our next topic because we've got some other things we want you to do in terms of calling the members of Parliament. But our next topic is cancel AUKUS now. And we're going to be launching a big mobilisation on this. We've just this week called for a parliamentary inquiry, which had been canvassed by a number of MPs before the election or during the election, saying, like Monique Ryan and a number of the Teals and Independents saying we need to really relook at this, see if it's still fit for purpose, etc. Not that it ever was. But the point that we made is that the political situation has dramatically changed because when Albanese, he was in opposition when this was put up, and in 2021 he caved into it because of the usual, risk of being called soft on national security, etc., etc. But now the situation has changed dramatically because, of course, you had Scott Morrison, who was, had launched the big chill on China, and the relations with China went down the sinkhole, and Dutton, kept that momentum, beating the drums of war and pushing for, to us to be on a war footing with China, etc., etc. But now both of those guys have been defeated in elections by Albanese, and partly because Albanese promised in the first campaign and delivered at least in part on stabilising our relationship with China and restoring trade. So Australia's, feeling now towards China has changed quite dramatically since the time when AUKUS was signed. And there's every possibility, as Robert Barwick, Research Director of the ACP, said in the statement we put out, that if AUKUS had been put up today for the first time, that it wouldn't have got legs at all. So we need to relook at this and we need to mobilise the population on this because the point, and I think we really can, because here we have $368 billion going to submarines and other programs that we'll most likely never see in the midst of a cost of living crisis, collapsing infrastructure. As you mentioned, you know, a productive economy that's hit the skids, and if we don't turn it around, we're going to be in deep, deep trouble. So we can't be spending this money. And I wanted to put this in the broader context of the war situation on a number of fronts globally, where it does seem that the sentiment at the highest level may be changing. And so you've seen various things, such as the fact that the new Pope, who was just elected in his first Sunday sermon, declared never again war. And he went on to say in a press statement thereafter, we must reject the paradigm of war. And he pointed to ceasefire initiatives, such as the one where hopefully meetings will take place in Turkey between Russia and Ukraine. That's all very much, you know, remains to be seen what happens there, but he, you know, put that forward as something that was at least a promising initiative. The ceasefire that, as far as I know, is still holding to this time between India and Pakistan, but again, remains to be seen where that ends up. And he also, the Pope, that is, issued a demand for an immediate ceasefire in Gaza, following on his predecessor's statements about the nature of that situation. Now, at the same time, we've reported in our Australian Alert Service this week the stunning meeting that took place, of course, with the celebration of the end of World War II in Moscow. And this, of course, as you would expect, given the current geopolitical situation, was boycotted by all of the major Western nations. But nonetheless, a stunning array of people gathered in Moscow for those celebrations, including 27 heads of state and 6 other high-level country representatives, 10 institutions. And while that was ongoing, Russia conducted 3 state visits and 20 bilateral meetings in a stunning array of activity over 4 days. And then there were a whole lot of other bilateral meetings between different countries that were there on the sidelines.
Sideline meetings, exactly.
And a number of people called this said it was like a second BRICS Kazan summit, which was the BRICS summit that had occurred in Russia late last year. I think
November.
It was October, November.
There,
So they said it was an opportunity for the countries of the Global South to discuss issues of reforming the world order. And of course, they've been pushing for, as a basis of peace and for security arrangements, an uplifting of the developing countries, and that they have a voice and a place at the table. You know, no longer can we be in a unipolar world order, which is dominated by the Anglo-Americans. That has to change. And of course, the Anglo-Americans are kicking and screaming about that for sure. One of the interesting things, though, relating to AUKUS is that the Russians and the Chinese put out this statement on global strategic stability. And this is what it said: the two sides state that the efforts undertaken by the AUKUS partnership to establish military infrastructure of 2 nuclear weapon states in support of the activities of their nuclear forces in the territory of a state party to the South Pacific Nuclear Free Zone Treaty undermine strategic stability and provoke an arms race in the region. So this China and Russia saying that AUKUS undermines strategic stability and provoke an arms race in the region, which is something that Indonesia has pointed to, which of course Albanese is there at the moment. So I'll just add, and you can read more about this in not only this Australian Alert Service, which you can contact us if you haven't received a free copy before, or you can subscribe as a way of supporting what we're doing, and just simply to be informed about these things. Because, some of the diplomacy that's going on internationally, particularly as Trump launched his tariff war, you had meetings between China, South Korea and Japan. You had the Chinese touring Southeast Asian countries. You have ASEAN +3 that are initiating new financial procedures that are less reliant on the dollar, because they're very nervous about what's happening to the stability of the US dollar, to US treasuries, which have been in turmoil again this year following on recent years of trouble there. The discussions that have gone on at the Moscow meeting that I just referred to, and many others, the diplomacy with Africa, I mean, you have the Sahel states, as we've been reporting, Niger, Mali, Burkina Faso, that have just started a national development or
multilateral.
I guess you'd call it, multilateral or international between those states, and other countries that are saying, oh, now we want to join that alliance, which broke from the previous colonial alliance that existed. Just speaking about Africa, I wanted to draw people's attention to the article that you wrote in this alert relating to Syria, because, you know, the French look like they want back in there when they've just been kicked out of the Sahel states. And, you know, military from America, etc., have been kicked out of some of these African countries. But in regard to the rehabilitation of the ISIS head chopper, who's now the leader of Syria, this is a stunning situation because, in fact, the Muslim terrorism that has been used as the pretext to conduct regime changes in places like Syria is a furphy. Give the viewers a picture of that, Richard.
Yeah, so we've got all the numbers, and thank you to our anonymous friend who supplied some of the analysis for that article. You know who you are. But yeah, the upshot is, while because the Anglo-American powers, the NATO crowd, France is one of the worst in this respect, with its colonial operations in North Africa and previously in the so-called Middle East, Southwest Asia. They're happy to support terrorists of any stripe, including when it serves their interests, including religiously motivated terrorists. And that includes this guy, Mr. Ahmed al-Shara, aka Abu Muhammad al-Jalani, who the British, French, Americans and Israel have installed or allowed to assisted to install himself as dictator, interim president of Syria. And he trims his beard and cuts his hair and puts on I think they said it's a Brooke Brothers suit in place of his military fatigues, and now he's back to being a moderate rebel. Meanwhile, his organisation is still the official, it's on the terrorist watch list, he's on the wanted list. France had to get a waiver from the UN, according to the government sources quoted in French state media, France 24, to go to Paris to meet with Macron. And they're doing all the, the glad handing and the smile for the camera. And then he's gone and he's been invited to do the same in Britain. Apparently he hasn't actually gone there yet, but he went to Saudi Arabia and did the same with Trump, offered to build him a Trump Tower in Damascus as a sign of his appreciation. That's not a joke. This is how these people operate. Yeah. They have no shame, they have no principles. So while they're supporting these actual terrorists from the small minority of nominal Muslims who the actual mainstream Muslims, well over 90, who knows, 99% or more want absolutely nothing to do with.
Yeah, they abhor.
Just because most of the victims of these terrorists who call themselves Muslims are Muslims, because that's whose countries we send them to destroy. And so while they're doing that, they beat the drums about, the media, entertainment, Hollywood, Netflix, the so-called news like ABC and all these others are just as bad as Murdoch, really. And they'll whitewash these terrorists abroad, but then they'll gee up fear that every Muslim that you see, all your neighbours, could be one of them. Probably, just assume they're one of those until proven otherwise, right? Mm-hmm. And so what we've gone through, the numbers that we've included in this article, if you look, there's an outfit called Europol. It's the European Union's police cooperation, law enforcement cooperation thing. It's like Interpol, but internal to the European Union. Mm-hmm. They keep the world's only authoritative database on terrorism broken down by motivation. And you go through and you find, actually, during that decade between around 2006 to 2015, when there was all of these all this highly publicised and some quite, high casualty terrorist attacks by these returned ISIS fighters that they let go back and forth to Syria.
Yeah.
And some just, disturbed kids, and a couple of these happened here as well. Despite all that, if you look at the actual numbers,
Yeah.
the statistical representation of Muslims in terrorism, most terrorist incidents in Europe are violent separatist groups from this or that country or province or whatever. And the Muslim community is 3 to 4 times less likely, on average, to have anything to do with terrorism in any form.
Yeah, that's stunning. You wouldn't think that, would you, from what, it's painted, as you said, in the movies, TV, media.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just completely the opposite of what you would think.
And I looked at the latest, they put these, they're called TSAT. They come out every year based on the previous year's data. And so you look at the ones for the figures from the 2024 report, which is the 2023 numbers. And it's the same thing, within, the number, this and that, the numbers go up and down, the proportions go up and down a bit, but it's basically the same situation still. And the forward, even though it's still separatist, still all the same thing, and it's more left-wing extremist this and right-wing extremist that, but the forward frames it as being, the only issue that they actually name is the supposed, threats to the Western order because of the uproar over what's happening in Gaza. And they blame Hamas for it, as though Israel had not spent all these decades dispossessing and massacring Palestinians and locking them up and controlling their lives and all the rest of it. So they're still doing it, and it's still garbage, like it always was.
Yeah.
So anytime you catch yourself thinking along those lines, just remember, just read this article.
Sure.
Anyone who's watching this.
Yeah, we'll put the link to the article below so you can read the details.
And so, that's just, have a think about it instead of just believing, what you see.
Yeah, because normally you don't even think about it, but it's just that axiom lurking in the back of your mind somewhere.
Yeah, well, for a lot of people, unfortunately.
Yeah. And speaking of such fabricated pretexts for whether it be regime change or national security laws, of which we have the most in this country, probably of anywhere in the world, 100 anti-terrorism, national security type laws.
Since 2001, justified by this supposed terrorism threat and national security and foreign interference and all the rest of it.
Yeah. I just wanted to briefly point to another article in the Australian Alert Service, Fractured Jewish Community Views on Anti-Semitism, which reports on the New South Wales Parliamentary Inquiry into anti-Semitism. And we had a look at the 71 submissions that are there. 45 of those submissions are from people within the Jewish community or Jewish community organisations, but less than 1/3 of those submissions accepted that there was a disturbing rise in anti-Semitism. And I just wanted to cite a few of the examples of people actually pointing to quite the opposite impact. One person said, "I am extremely concerned about the way anti-Semitism is being weaponised to suit political purposes, especially by Peter Dutton and the Liberal National Party coalition." Another said that the small increase in active anti-Semitism in the community is being misrepresented by political players for political purposes. This political weaponisation of anti-Semitism and accusations of anti-Semitism is itself a danger to the Jewish community because it divides the community. Another wrote that the somewhat counterintuitive group from whom I have received anti-Semitic vitriol has been Zionist supporters of Israel. And others complained of, these are Jewish people, complained of having been called self-hating Jews, Jewish traitor, etc., etc. So this is quite a stunning revelation in a similar, on a similar line to what you were reporting.
Well, remember, and these state in New South Wales and federal, amping up of these hate speech laws based on this supposed upsurge in anti-Semitism that these Jewish community members are saying didn't happen. Well, we know that they admitted as soon as they got their laws through, they acknowledged, someone leaked to the papers and they admitted it was true, that there was never anything to this so-called terrorism plot, our biggest mass casualty event potentially, blah, 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 from Chris Minns and Albanese and the rest of them. with this caravan supposedly full of explosives that was actually just a box of old, 40-year-old expired mining blasting stuff with no detonators that's been kicking around the country for all these years in a caravan in Dural.
Yeah.
And then they admit it's fake. Oh, but we're not repealing the laws. How dare you suggest such a thing?
Yep.
You know, they knew that it was fake. And now they're blaming the police. I wonder how the police feel about that.
And I think it was Four Corners that did a whole show on it recently about the criminal elements, I mean, drug runners and such, that actually set this thing up for their own purposes.
Well, that's what they're saying.
Completely unrelated to...
Yeah, but then they were being paid by somebody.
Yeah, so, you know, again, it's the political grist for the mill that becomes advantageous here, as some of these people pointed out, and as we've just witnessed during the election. Now, talking about political grist for the mill, finally, and this is where we want our people to, again, make contact with their MPs, and in particular with Michelle Rowland's office as the new Attorney General, because Daniel Duggan is a case we've talked about being grist for the anti-China mill for a long time on this show, and I won't go through the details now, but we'll put a link to the press release that we're just putting out today as we speak, because the previous Attorney General, Mark Dreyfus, was woefully inadequate. I mean, you've got, this is an Australian citizen who's been kept from his family and who is going to be extradited to America under a warrant and proceedings that were all secretive, and which Australia is not defending his right to justice in this case. So Michelle Rowland has to be her feet held to the fire over this issue. Equally, David McBride, who sits in jail for exposing, truths about what we got up to in Afghanistan in the military circles at the highest levels, and he's actually just passed 365 days in jail. A couple of days ago. He should have been given awards and medals, not stuck in jail. So you can raise him as well. Yeah,
and this is the thing. If Albanese accepted AUKUS out of political cowardice, if, as he says, he wants to stabilise relations with our neighbours, if they're serious about these things like social cohesion that they keep rabbiting on about and then destroying with all of their, including the economic policies, the housing, the fundamental basis of a cohesive, stable society that they're denying people because the banks told them to. All of these things are really, it boils down to the same issue. Do you actually represent the people? Do you actually stand for any of the things you say you stand for?
Yes.
That's the question here. And their response to this will answer that question.
Yes, so please click on the links below and put those questions in one form or another to Michelle Rowland and to the, what's her name?
Annika Wells.
Annika Wells on the post office situation, because, as you said, one way or another, these issues are all related. Are you representing me or who? Who are you representing? The banks or our dangerous Anglo-American alliance? That's the bottom line. So please, now that you've finished watching the show, go click on those 2 press releases there and make your contribution to the fight ongoing. And that's the show for this week. Thanks, Richard.
Thanks, Elisa.
Thanks for tuning in. See you again next week.
Authorised by Robert Barwick, Citizens Party, Melbourne.